Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about the one thing that's been secretly holding you back without you even realizing it.
You didn't stay because you were weak. You stayed because you kept thinking the next conversation would be different. And if you're watching this right now, you already know how that turned out. Maybe it started slowly, not with a fight, not even with silence at first. It started with small things you told yourself didn't matter. He stopped asking how your day was. You stopped expecting him to. You made dinner. He ate it. You cleaned up. He didn't notice. And somewhere in there, you started wondering when the last time was that he looked at you. Really looked at you like you were someone he was curious about. You've probably had this moment. You're lying next to him at night, and the space between you feels wider than the bed. Not because you're angry, because you're not anything. And that's worse, because anger would mean there's still something alive between you. This just feels empty. You've tried talking about it more than once. You've said, I feel like we're not connected anymore. He said, we're fine. You've said, I need more from you. He said, I don't know what you want me to do. And after enough of those conversations, you stopped having them. Because it's exhausting to explain loneliness to someone who doesn't feel it. So you adjusted. You stopped reaching for his hand. You stopped sharing the small things that used to matter. You built a life around him, instead of with him. And you told yourself this is just what marriage becomes. This is maturity. This is partnership. This is commitment. You made it make sense. You filled your time. You focused on the kids, if you have them. You stayed busy. You had good days. You laughed at something on TV together. You ran errands. You coordinated schedules. And from the outside it probably looked fine. But inside, there was this quiet voice, the one that whispered late at night. Is this it? Is this what the rest of my life looks like? You pushed it down. Because what would people think if you left over? What, he's not abusive, he's not cruel, he just doesn't see you. And how do you explain that to someone who thinks marriage is about what you do, not how you feel? You've carried this alone for a long time, and the hardest part isn't even the loneliness. It's that you've started to wonder if maybe you're asking for too much. Here's what most people don't understand about staying. You didn't stay because you were confused about how you felt. You stayed because you were confused about whether you were allowed to feel that way. Let me explain what I mean. There's this quiet belief that gets planted early. It says, if the marriage isn't visibly broken, you don't have permission to leave. If he's not cheating, if he's not abusing you, if he's not abandoning the family, then the problem must be you. You're too sensitive, you're too needy, you're expecting too much, and so you stay. Not because you want to, because you haven't proven to yourself, to him, to everyone watching, that it's bad enough to justify leaving. This is the invisible contract you've been living under. The one that says, your emotional pain doesn't count unless someone else can see it. So you wait. You wait for him to do something so wrong that no one could blame you for leaving. You wait for a moment clear enough that you won't have to defend yourself. And in the meantime, you stay in a marriage that stopped nourishing you years ago. Here's what happens during that waiting. You start to disappear. Not all at once, slowly. You stop saying what you need, because he's already told you he doesn't understand. You stop expecting emotional intimacy, because it's easier than being disappointed again. You stop taking up space in your own life. And the worst part, you start to believe this is normal. You look around and see other marriages that look just as distant, just as polite, just as empty. And you think, maybe this is just what love becomes after a while. Maybe I'm romanticizing something that doesn't exist, but here's the truth. The reason you stayed isn't because you didn't know you were unhappy. It's because you kept thinking you could make him understand. If you just explained it better, if you just asked differently, if you just waited until he was less stressed, less distracted, less tired, you were hoping that one day he would wake up and see you the way he used to, that he would notice the distance, that he would care enough to close it. And maybe there were moments when you thought it was happening. A good weekend, a kind gesture, a conversation that felt real, and you held on to that like proof. See, he's still in there. We can still fix this. But then the next week came, and the distance came back, and you realized that wasn't connection. That was just a break from disconnection. Let that sit for a moment, because this is where the real confusion starts. You weren't staying because the marriage was good. You were staying because it wasn't bad all the time. And those small moments of not bad felt like hope. They felt like reason enough to stay another month, another year, another decade. But here's what you were really doing. You were teaching yourself that your needs could wait, that your feelings could be managed, that your loneliness was something you could survive as long as you kept yourself small enough. And over time, that became the norm. Not happiness, not partnership, just endurance. And now, if you're here, maybe you're finally asking yourself the question you've been afraid to ask. Did I try hard enough? Let me speak to that directly. You tried in ways no one will ever see. You tried by staying when you wanted to leave. You tried by explaining your needs over and over, in different words, hoping one version would land. You tried by lowering your expectations so many times, you forgot what you originally wanted. You tried by convincing yourself that this was enough. And when that didn't work, you tried harder. But here's the question no one asks. How much trying is required before you're allowed to stop? How many years of feeling unseen do you need to endure before it's okay to say, this isn't working for me? Because right now, you might be feeling something that sounds like this. If I leave, I'm giving up. If I leave, I'm abandoning my commitment. If I leave, I'm choosing my feelings over my family. And those thoughts are heavy. They're the reason you're still here, questioning yourself, wondering if there's something you missed. But let me reframe this for you. Leaving is not giving up. Leaving is stopping the pattern that was never going to change on its own. You didn't fail because you couldn't make him meet you halfway. He failed to show up, and you are not responsible for doing the emotional work of two people in a marriage. I know you're afraid of regret. You're afraid that 5 years from now, you'll look back and think, maybe I should have stayed longer. But let me ask you this. What if 5 years from now, you look back and think, I wish I had trusted myself sooner? What if the regret isn't about leaving? What if it's about how long you stayed in a place that made you feel invisible? You're also afraid of what people will think. They'll say, but he seemed like a good guy. They'll say, marriage is hard. You have to work at it. They'll say, maybe you're being too emotional. And you will have to sit there and explain something you should have to explain, that you can feel desperately lonely next to someone who has never raised his voice. That emotional neglect doesn't leave visible scars. That just because he didn't do anything wrong doesn't mean you were getting what you needed. But here's what I want you to hear. You don't owe anyone a performance of your pain. You don't have to prove that it was bad enough. You already know, divorce is not a failure. Divorce is what happens when you finally stop pretending. It's not the beginning of the problem. It's the acknowledgement of something that's been true for a long time. You didn't destroy your marriage by leaving. The marriage ended long before the paperwork. It ended the first time you felt invisible and said nothing. It ended the 100th time he didn't ask how you were. It ended when you realized you were more lonely with him than you ever were by yourself. The divorce is just the moment you stopped living in denial, and that takes more courage than staying ever did. I know that's hard to accept right now, because we've been taught that love is supposed to conquer everything. That commitment means enduring. That leaving means you didn't try hard enough. But love isn't supposed to make you disappear. Commitment isn't supposed to feel like self-abandonment. And trying isn't supposed to mean sacrificing your sense of self for someone who isn't meeting you where you are. What you're redoing right now, whether you're rethinking about it, is not selfish. It's self-respect. And those are not the same thing. Selfishness is taking without regard for others. Self-respect is refusing to lose yourself while waiting for someone else to see you. There's a difference. Here's what I want you to understand. You are not leaving because you stopped loving him. You're leaving because you stopped abandoning yourself. And that shift, that quiet, internal shift is not something anyone else will fully understand unless they've lived it. But you don't need them to understand. You just need to trust that the woman who stayed as long as she did, who tried as hard as she did, who gave as much as she did, that woman is also strong enough to choose herself now. So where does that leave you? Maybe you're still in it. Maybe you've already left. Maybe you're somewhere in between. Wherever you are, I want you to know this. You are not broken for feeling what you feel. You are not weak for wanting more. And you are not wrong for recognizing that this wasn't the life you wanted to live. Clarity doesn't always come before the decision. Sometimes it comes after. Sometimes you have to step away before you can finally see what you were living in. And if you're here, watching this, recognizing yourself in these words, then you already know what I'm talking about. You've been living with this for longer than you've said out loud, and maybe this is the first time someone has said it back to you in a way that feels true. If this resonated, if this felt like something you needed to hear months ago or years ago, there is more we need to talk about. Not because I have all the answers, but because you're not the only one who's been carrying this quietly. And sometimes, just knowing you're not alone in it makes the next step a little less frightening. Thank you for being here, for trusting yourself enough to listen, and for giving yourself permission to feel what you've been feeling all along.